Growing up online, I've only seen a handful of creators truly show love to the golden age of early home consoles. I'm talking, of course, about the Atari 2600. It's a topic that always fascinated me, growing up with the angry video game nerds and the like, teaching me interesting history and learning to appreciate the system for what it had to offer at the dawn of a new technological era. And while I don't expect a majority of the online audience these days to really give a shit, I'm taking it upon myself to make a case for these games because despite 50 years of technical achievement, this revolutionary system is still widely relevant today. So, allow me to take you on a journey as we explore some timeless classics of the Atari 2600 library as I make a case for why you need to play these games for yourself. To really be able to appreciate Atari's legacy as a developer, publisher, and a hardware manufacturer, we need to first show appreciation for those whom paved the way. Yes, Atari was not the first onto the scene. That title goes to Magnavox with their Magnavox Odyssey home system from 1972.
Entertain themselves with Odyssey, the electronic game of the future, and the family's best foul-weather friend.
It was a very primitive Pong-esque device that barely passed for an electronic toy, let alone a video or a game. But it was Atari, after seeing this, who would triumph the creation of Pong later that year, which is what really kicked off the gaming craze. Gen 1 systems were all about the Pong, and that's definitely one way of looking at it. The sheer volume of boxes produced during this time, all just to play Pong, kinda stinks. But this did create the opportunity for many electronics and toy companies to start looking towards the future of home entertainment, companies like Nintendo even. But I mean, you can only play Pong for so long. I mean, I haven't even touched mine in years. It's not exactly your 100-hour 3-disc epic, but to give it some credit, I've seen more people huddle around this at conventions than the more modern titles, proving that the basic competitive nature of it has definitely crafted a solid foundation for the industry. It wasn't until 1977 that Atari would release their video computer system, which really popularised this idea of game systems being less of a toy for kids and more of a home appliance like a video player or a microwave. It's fun for the whole family, which is how the brand was marketed, with primitive but interactive games that simulated sports, were educational tools for the kids, and even featured some more grown-up challenge for the adults. But what made the system so unique was its use of interchangeable cartridges. This meant that instead of blowing the family budget on a new Pong box every Christmas, now you've only got to buy the box once, and then the games can be sold separately, similar to VHS tapes, which were also a new thing at the time. It was a novel idea that really promoted longevity and value to the purchase, which quickly began to justify the asking price. Now, at launch, the original Atari would have set families back just under $200 in the 70s, which, woof, that's an expensive box of electronic crap right there. I mean, for games that look like they were developed during the Civil War, it's quite the asking price. Inflation puts this system in at around $1,000 in today's money, which is scary to think about, and hey, that's US dollars, by the way. I mean, for what it cost for an Atari in 1977, I could essentially go out and purchase not one, but two lame-ass PlayStation 5s for the same amount of money. That is just an insane statistic. And yes, I am fully aware of the irony that I own this technological juggernaut, but would still rather play a decrepit old corpse with his beeps and boops. Yeah, now that's what you call a fucking video game. Baby's first brain rot. Now, I really want to stress that beyond the novelty of these being some of the very first home video games, most of these early titles weren't great, which admittedly did hinder Atari's takeover at first. While the company did see some success throughout 78 and 79, so did the Magnavox Odyssey 2 and Mattel's Intellivision home systems, but more importantly, it was the arcade scene that began emerging with classic hits like Space Invaders in 1978, Galaxian in 79 alongside Atari's own Asteroids unit, which would spark the arcade takeover of the 1980s. This created a marketable concept of being able to play these arcade games in the home. No waiting in line for a turn, and no wasted coins on a failed attempt. And with Atari already at the forefront of both markets, the adaptation of these popular titles to the home VCS, later renamed the 2600, was the first step in creating what the system's legacy would become over the next few years. At its core, this was a system designed to bring the arcade into your home. So, let's get into some games, shall we? Now, for most of what I'll be playing today, I will be using authentic Atari hardware. I've got my Atari Junior system set up down there, which comes with its really awkward joystick controller, copied over from the 7800 console design. It's really not good to use. The way you have to sort of hold it and the buttons are on the side, it's a bit stiff and unwieldy, but hey, that's just how a lot of these consoles were back in the day. Now, the good news is that Atari controllers use the same plug connector as the classic Sega consoles. You know, the Sega Master System and the Mega Drive or the Genesis. So really any controller that's compatible with those Sega systems should realistically also be compatible with your 2600 hardware, making for quite a modern gaming experience playing today. But listen, you don't need all of this old ass crap to get into Atari. These days we have emulators and sites that host the games for free, many of which offer touchscreen controls for your phone, and honestly, that's actually a pretty fun way to explore these titles. Just play them on the train while you're killing time. There is definitely some similarity to the style of these games when compared with modern mobile titles. But there have also been countless re-releases and remaster collections over the years. In fact, I first got my start playing Atari with Xbox Live's Game Arcade, where you could build your own little setup and pay for machines as DLC to unlock the different systems. And the most recent compilation celebrates Atari's 50th anniversary, featuring games across all of their different systems, as well as a few unreleased prototypes and remasters. But in my opinion, nothing beats using original hardware, because there is no other way that you're going to get that authentic experience of the noisy screen artifacting and the patented technical malfunctions and breakdowns that can only be expected when playing a system that's almost 50 years old. Now that's how you play Atari. Oh, let me tell you, getting this plugged into my Elgato for game capture was a whole saga of its own, and even then, some of the games still refused to display correctly, so prepare for some gameplay recorded directly off of the TV, because we're just going to be doing whatever works to get us through this. Alright, let's start off with these arcade ports. Space Invaders was the killer app of the system back in 1980, and I'm not surprised because it was incredibly inventive with unique modes such as moving shields, invisible ships, and co-op multiplayer. Now over the years, so many great classic arcade games would find their way onto the system, from Dig Dug, Berserk, Frogger, Asteroids, even Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. Yeah, imagine that, Nintendo's two big names not on a Nintendo-owned system. Now obviously side by side with their original versions, graphically none of these even come close to comparison, and that's a given. These games were designed on much stronger hardware back in the day. That's why you needed such a big box to play them on. Cramming all of that into a more functional alternative comes with its costs, which is why you won't really hear me criticising the graphics with many of the games we talk about today. But honestly, what is there to criticise? There is an inherent charm to the visual style, and what it teaches us still to this day is the fundamental language for visual interpretation. Missile Command has always been a favourite of mine, and you get those tasty explosion sounds as the sky lights up in fire. Berserk is awesome. It's basically Doom of the era, going from room to room, surviving an onslaught of robots, and Evil Otto, the bouncing happy face that chases you through the levels. What the Atari version lacks in voice synthesis that the arcade had, it definitely maintains that fun, fast-paced action.
Intruder alert, intruder alert.
Defender is another arcade port which maintains faithful gameplay and even a good attempt at replicating the heads-up display. It is kind of funny though, when you shoot, it turns the ship into a torpedo as it streaks across your screen. Both Dig Dug and Frogger really show just how colourful some of these games can get, both all-time favourites of mine. However, not all of these arcade ports were created equally. Pac-Man was famously criticised at the time for its mediocre graphics, which is quite rich in retrospect, but also for its disappointing gameplay, which doesn't even come close to the feeling you get in the arcades, as the ghosts lack all of their defining logic. This was thankfully rectified with Ms. Pac-Man delivering a much better audio-visual experience and gameplay closer to home, with Pac-Man Jr. taking things a step further with the scrolling map. Nintendo's Donkey Kong and Mario Bros. Arcade titles don't quite live up to the charming visual expectations. I mean, just look at DK up there. Man is just a slab of meat. But the gameplay is at least functional, though perhaps not the best way to play either of these games today. Later arcade games that were ported over included titles such as Vanguard, which became quite synonymous with Atari's marketing.
Fellas, who destroys the gun?
Luther destroys the gun.
As well as Jungle Hunt, which is arguably the much more famous version of the game instead of the arcade original. Players jump across vines, swim through currents avoiding crocodiles, you've got to jump and duck to dodge bouncing boulders, and finally, get past the racially insensitive tribespeople to save your girlfriend. It was the 80s, what are you gonna do? But more impressive is the parallax scrolling. Check that out, dude! Super Nintendo, eat your heart out. This is the stuff that I love to see when looking back at such older games. Pole Position is a racing title that achieves a 3D perspective, similar to games like Sega's Outrun and Rad Racer on the NES. For hardware this primitive, it's honestly a miracle that this works, and works so well. And alongside these notable ports, Atari still had in-house developers creating original games for the system as well, which many were a big part in building that brand recognition among consumers. The games were all simplistic, yet quite in-depth for the era, creating a perfect clash of styles which the brand marketed itself by. From the Bauhaus-inspired type fonts and simple, modern shapes, to the insanely detailed and gorgeously illustrated box art that sells just how epic and revolutionary each new experience was. It might be a little clickbaity by today's standards, but listen, Atari box art was in a league of its own. So much so that there is an entire encyclopedia dedicated to the art of Atari, which I have here. Now, admittedly, I've never actually read much of this book. I just have too much ADHD for that. But it's still quite fascinating to flick through it and sort of learn about how Atari focused so much attention to detail into the artwork of not just the individual games, but the Atari brand as a whole as it grew over the years. And I mean, perfect page to represent that. We've got E.T., the extraterrestrial, right there, and a whole piece about digging up the buried Atari landfill back in the early 2010s. Working with such incredible artistic talent and leaning so heavily into creating these whimsical masterpieces complemented a child's own imagination when playing the game. You know, that's why as adults we can never recreate those childhood-like moments playing today because we're seeing life through jaded eyes. But show a kid something like this, then they're going to process that information, build it up in their head so that when they play the game, they're seeing the unlimited potential of imagination. This is the premier adventure title for the system, known as Adventure. Makes sense? The goal is to venture out of the castle through a maze using different items to help you on your search for a magical chalice, avoiding this terrifying dragon creature in the process. It's a neat little game that no doubt inspired the likes of Legend of Zelda years later, and one that I'd say does live up to its cover. Another classic is Haunted House. You're a set of eyeballs walking around a dark, creepy mansion, going from floor to floor, avoiding ghouls, and you've got to use your flashlight to find your way through. Next up is Circus Atari, which is a remix of Breakout. Now this is a paddle game, which means that you have to have the paddle controllers in order to play. This console had so many different peripherals, man. Did you know that the 2600 had the very first wireless controllers in 1982? It's pretty crazy. But anyway, these paddles are quite fragile, so they're hard to get in good working order, but dude, I cannot describe the fluent movement they can produce. It's honestly comparable to modern systems, no hyperbole, but even that can't describe it. Smooth as arse cheeks. So you've got to move the seesaw back and forth in order to spring the acrobats up into the ceiling lights. It looks like they're destroying the ozone layer with their faces. We also had Video Pinball, which, if you thought Windows Pinball was old school, then feast your eyes on this. Talk about bringing the arcade experience into your living room, this one is surprisingly very solid. The way the ball, or the square, reacts to the paddles and bounces off of walls is very satisfying and authentic. It always impresses me that most games of this era were often conceived and created by individuals working within the company, and of course one of the most famous of these individuals is Howard Scott Warshaw. One of his greatest games, Yars' Revenge, is definitely a highlight of the system for me personally, as I've always loved its trippy visuals. You're just this little fella chipping away at an alien's shield in order to make way for a missile to fly through and nuke the entire map. It's fast-paced shooter action, which is what the system was known for. And it was during this peak of consumer electronics taking over and pop culture truly establishing itself that led to the invention of the licensed video game, a genre that was perpetually flogged over and over again ever since. The first Atari movie game was Superman back in '79, and man, does it show. You fly around this never-ending rainbow of cityscapes, taking bad guys to jail and protecting Lois Lane. It's impossible to know where the hell you are when the screens just repeat infinitely, and to be honest, I never cared enough to figure this one out because once you lose the ability to fly, being stuck on the ground is depressing, the state of it. There was also Flash Gordon, Ghostbusters, Star Wars Jedi Battle Arena, to name a few other licensed titles, but following the commercial success of Yars' Revenge, Warshaw was tasked with creating another of the platform's signature adventure games, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now this game is so advanced that you actually need 2 controllers in order to play it. Given that the default Atari controller only had 1 button at the time, controller number 2 moves Indiana Jones around the environment, and pressing the button uses your items such as the whip, the gun, and whatever the hell else all this other shit is. Controller number 1 is used to manage your inventory, and the button drops and swaps items out. Now listen, I spent almost 2 hours with this game. I had a vague idea of what needed to be done in order to beat the game, as this is one of the few games of the era with an actual ending, but even despite that, I fell back onto the reliance of a walkthrough because how the fuck would you ever figure this shit out on your own? Not to mention the countless bullshit deaths that I suffered over and over and over again, but despite all of that, I actually fucking love this game. I appreciate it so much because it just goes to show how creative some developers were able to get in order to interpret certain ideas and create something comprehensive, worthy of the player's time. And of course, the success of this game led Warshaw down a path of irreversible consequences, but hey, we'll get to that later. So, with Atari's stranglehold on its now booming market share and profits, due to frustrations from developers within the company feeling that they deserved better rights, given all of the success that they'd brought Atari, the walkout of several key individuals would ultimately lead to the creation of third-party developers as we know them today, with the formation of Activision. Now, It's crazy to think that Activision was born out of developers looking for better treatment. Live long enough to see yourself become the villain, I guess. But at the time, Activision's contributions to the industry was a substantial output of quality, original games for the home system, giving Atari an edge over the competition. Kicking off 1980 with titles like Dragster, Boxing, Fishing Derby, and Checkers. Yeah, okay, look, it was humble beginnings. I can't understand the logic behind making a virtual checkers game in an era when people still played checkers with an actual board, or still played checkers at all for that matter. Every time you see the screen go black, that's the game thinking up its next move as sparks and smoke fly out of the cartridge. And yes, despite the technical limitations, this crafty fucker actually beat me. My big boy brain was beaten by a computer. A computer with less than a single megabyte of memory. Can I even call myself a man anymore? Oh man, I'm never gonna live this down. Oh, it's all over, may as well just go throw my carcass off a bridge! But it was this early success which paved the way for further expansion into a third-party empire, with namesakes such as Pitfall and River Raid, but also their lesser discussed, more generic games, all still standing out substantially thanks to their quality and also the ingenuity with the ideas presented. I've always been quite partial to Stampede. It's no Red Dead Redemption, but seeing those little bastards skits out on the higher difficulty is amazing. Look at them go! Or how about Chopper Command? This one is a Defender clone, but instead of a sci-fi setting, we're in the desert blowing shit up. And just look at that sunset. Atari games always have the most glorious sunsets. Sequest is a similar game where you navigate a submarine trying to save people from drowning while occasionally resurfacing to refill your oxygen. And if you want to talk about nice sunsets, well, let's check out Enduro. It's another faux 3D racing game, but as you're speeding through traffic, the weather changes from sunny to snow. The sun sets so you can only see the tail lights of other cars on the road at night time, and there is even a fog effect, which is actually pretty impressive. Oh, and if you're wondering about the immediate boost in video quality, that's because I'm playing these games on the PS2 Activision Anthology Collection, which features a neat virtual game room and a ton of games, including some that were never released. And I can see why, they're kinda stinky. Anyway, Robot Tank is another game on this collection, which had a similar day-night cycle restricting your vision in this first-person tank simulator. It's crazy seeing what would have been some of the earliest examples of simulation-type games from this era, such as this one, which places you in the cockpit of a space shuttle launching into the atmosphere. It's all quite realistic, even if, I don't really know what's going on, but it's neat to see. But listen, I am getting kind of sick of all this space stuff. Activision also wasn't shy of cranking out their own generic space shit that all looks the same, where you do nothing but shoot shit. But then comes a game like Plaque Attack, where you're using toothpaste to stop all of the evil junk food from rotting your teeth away. Everything from burgers, hot dogs, fries, and strawberries? I thought fruit was supposed to be good for you. Why are the strawberries rotting my teeth to all hell? Pressure Cooker lets you control a chef making burgers with all the different ingredients, trying to match the orders on screen. This one is pretty fun, but I am a kid who grew up on all those burger making flash games back in the day, so perhaps I'm a little biased. One game that I discovered in my collection that I'd never really appreciated before was Frostbite. Let me tell you, this Inuit is into it, hopping across platforms like some kind of Frogger collecting blocks to build his igloo, but watch out, because there is a nasty polar bear out to get you if you're not careful. Oh my god, man, that is the cutest polar bear I've ever seen. This was just one of 4 games featured on the Rad Action Pack. There were a lot of these different compilation packs like this released for the Atari. We've got the Smash Hit Pack, the Hot Action Pack, and the Mega Fun Pack, along with a whole arsenal of 2-packs. See, with the successful invention of third-party developers, essentially now anybody could make a game and sell it for the system with or without Atari's approval. This led to a monstrous volume of bootleg games, many of which literally just had a different cover slapped on and any recognisable imagery removed. For example, here we have a game called Boom Bang. It's a clone of Activision's Crackpots. Both are identical outside of a few choice details, whereas Oink is literally the exact same game, only now it's referred to as Pigs and Wolf. And man, let me tell you, this is a funny fucking game. The heart-racing intensity, the vacant stare of the pig, the sound effects of the wolf tractor beaming the pig directly into its mouth. Good shit. It's got me squealing like a little piglet over here. Man, the Atari was the Wild West era of gaming. If you could think of an idea, then there is probably already a game of it. Cops and robbers? Done. Demon attack? Sure thing. Dolphin game? Absolutely. Gay twink hacky sack? You betcha. Interstellar Noah's Ark? Well, why the hell not? Skateboarding? Well, I can't forget that one. Planet Patrol? Ah, my fucking eyes! They even had the Sword Quest series of games where you explore dungeons and play mini-games to find secret codes that were associated with DC Comics, which allowed the players to go and win real-life medieval treasures such as gold-encrusted tablets, diamond-bedazzled goblets, and a goddamn actual sword. The best video on that topic to this day is still the old AVGN episode, so I'll link that if you want to learn more. But there was also barnstorming, skiing, giant snake battles, skeet shooting. Boy, does this one suck dick. We've got Kung Fu, we've got Laser Blast, we've got Gorf. Yeah, you never heard of Gorf? And to top it all off, Virtual Cookie Monster. Yeah, it doesn't get much better than that. Oh, and they also had a whole bunch of pornographic adult games that depicted public masturbation, penetration, whoring, and whatever the hell is going on here. I mean, what am I looking at? We've got some bird hanging from a helicopter, dropping milk out of her tits, trying to put out a fire so she can rescue this bloke down here from these Amazonian tribal women so they can bang. And as they say, the rest is history. Given the sheer volume of content available, much of which was less than mediocre quality, combined with some rather large-scale public failures, such as Howard Scott Warshaw's E.T. game, which, honestly, is not actually that bad. People shit on this game because of the meme, but it's actually kind of quirky and inventive, even if I don't really understand what's going on. But this was just wrong place, wrong time, with the potential of innovation leading the market into a severe nosedive in 1983. Now, this crashed a lot of key players within the industry, and unsold home video games were drastically recalled and replaced, burned, buried, whatever. But gaming never fully went away during this time. Larger companies such as Activision and Atari survived in the home computer space, which was beginning to gain speed in the US, while Japan consumers were already treated to Nintendo's Famicom. Even by 1985, by the time the system launched in the States as the Nintendo Entertainment System, Atari was still in full damage control mode, years after the events of the video game crash. Nintendo relaunched the concept of gaming in the home, so of course, Atari was there to try and retain some of its market share, even going as far to publish unlicensed games for Nintendo's system under the name Tengen. But never again would Atari come close to what it once was. Despite the market being taken over by Japanese-owned publishers, Atari continued supporting the 2600 with the release of its numerous predecessors, all of which would eventually bite the dust while the original VCS remained on life support all the way up until 1992, for Christ's sake. I mean, just think of the caliber of games available on store shelves in '92. It's hard to imagine still seeing something that looks like this still sitting next to them. But here's the thing, okay? Atari never died, and it probably never will die as long as these memories live on in the hearts of passionate gamers. In fact, there are still a ton of dedicated, passionate developers and programmers making brand new games for the system to this very day. Taking on the incredibly limiting hardware as a challenge to be conquered, we've seen plenty of gems rise up over the years, including fan projects such as AVGN Punch-Out, where you get to square off with the nerd Mike Tyson style, original games based on popular mobile phone gaming concepts that have been adapted so perfectly to the system's strengths, and we've even seen demakes of AAA classics such as Halo 2600. Yeah, check out how cool this is. This was made by Ed Fries, one of the founding fathers of the OG Xbox. I love projects like this as it only cements the argument that good graphics don't make a good game. And many of these aftermarket titles can actually be purchased online as physical cartridges that you can pop into original hardware, really proving that the platform's lifespan and relevance is far from dead. Perhaps if someone ported Ratchet and Clank to the Atari, then maybe I would have played it by now. Beyond the novelty of playing these crusty old games today, the point that I'm trying to make is that many of these experiences are still enjoyable, despite what they may lack in clarity or even communicating their ideas to the player. The core foundations of game design and interactive entertainment are arguably more straightforward and refined here than these concepts are today, making these games just so much fun to mess around with, especially with your friends or just while you're killing time. Sometimes I don't really feel like sitting down to beat some bloated modern epic, so I'll whip out my CRT and plug in some nostalgic classics, so warm and homely yet beyond the limits of this world. Inspired by endless creativity and innovation are some genuinely kick-ass adventures still worth your time playing today. So, I want to encourage you to go out and play some Atari today, because who knows what adventures you might discover throughout the wild west of gaming history. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. It's been a while since I've talked about some old Atari stuff here on the channel. In fact, I've just released a remade version of my top 15 Atari games video from a few years back, exclusively over on Patreon. So if you think I've earned it today, then consider signing up for that and remembering to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos coming up real soon. So until next time, I'm Square-Eyed Jack, and I hope you have a great fucking day. Thanks for watching.